Everyone was already seated when she stepped into the dining room. There was no chair left for her. The table was full, plates already set, glasses half filled with water, and conversations overlapping softly as she paused, just inside the doorway, her hands still resting on the doorframe. No one turned to look at her right away. And the sound of forks touching ceramic continued as if the room had already decided its shape before she arrived. She scanned the table once, slowly, counting the chairs without moving her head, noticing how each seat was occupied, how coats were draped over chair backs, how bags rested casually on the floor beside them. Someone laughed at something she couldn't hear clearly, and the laughter rolled across the table, filling the space where a greeting might have been. She took one step forward, then stopped again, her foot settling quietly on the floor, careful not to interrupt the rhythm that had already been established. The overhead light cast a warm glow over the table, highlighting the steam rising gently from the dishes, and the smell of food hung in the air, familiar and heavy. She waited, standing there, expecting someone to notice the extra space near the wall, the absence that had just appeared at the edge of the room. A glass was passed from one hand to another, fingers brushing briefly, and the movement drew her attention away from the empty corner she had been hoping for. She shifted her weight slightly, the strap of her bag pressing against her shoulder, and adjusted it even though it wasn't slipping. Finally, someone glanced up, their eyes meeting hers for just a moment before flicking down toward the table. Then back to their plate, as if the connection had been accidental. No one spoke. She remained standing, the silence stretching longer than felt comfortable, and she became aware of how still she was holding herself, how even her breathing seemed too loud in the room. A chair scraped softly against the floor as someone adjusted their position, pulling closer to the table, reducing the available space even further. She looked toward the far end of the table where an empty chair might have been placed before, but that corner was now occupied by a small side table holding extra dishes. Her eyes moved back to the center, tracing the familiar faces, each one engaged in their own conversation, hands moving, heads nodding, expressions relaxed. She waited for an invitation that didn't come. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, marking the seconds as they passed, and she found herself focusing on the sound, using it to measure how long she had been standing there. Someone reached across the table to grab a serving spoon, their arm briefly blocking her view, and when it moved away, nothing had changed. She took another step forward, this time closer to the table, and rested her hand lightly on the back of a chair that was already occupied, her fingers barely touching the wood. The person sitting there shifted slightly, pulling the chair inward, not aggressively, just enough to claim the space more clearly. She withdrew her hand and let it fall back to her side. The room continued as if she were not there, conversation flowing around her, fragments of sentences reaching her ears without forming a complete thought. She looked toward the kitchen, visible through the open doorway. Noticing the counter cluttered with dishes and a chair tucked under it, pushed too far in to be easily pulled out, she hesitated, then turned her body slightly in that direction, considering the distance, the effort it would take to move it. Before she could take a step, someone stood up briefly, crossing between her and the kitchen, and she stopped again, waiting for the path to clear. When it did, she remained where she was. The warmth of the room began to feel heavy, pressing in around her, and she adjusted the sleeve of her sweater, smoothing the fabric over her arm. She glanced down at her shoes, noticing a small mark on one toe, and bent slightly to brush it away with her fingers, straightening again slowly. Still, no one spoke to her. A phone buzzed somewhere on the table, vibrating against the wood, and the sound was quickly silenced as someone picked it up and slipped it into their pocket. She exhaled quietly, careful not to draw attention, and shifted her bag from one shoulder to the other. The movement caused the strap to brush against the doorframe behind her, and she stepped a fraction closer to the wall, giving the table more space. Someone poured more water into their glass, the sound of liquid filling it briefly dominating the room, and she watched the level rise before her gaze drifted away again. She realized then that no one was going to move. The understanding arrived without drama, settling into place as calmly as everything else in the room had, and she straightened her posture, lifting her chin slightly. She took a step backward, then another, retreating toward the doorway she had entered through moments earlier. Her movement went unnoticed. The chair legs remained where they were, the table unchanged, the conversations uninterrupted as she reached the threshold of the room. She paused there, just long enough to look back once more, taking in the scene as a whole, the way the table fit perfectly as it was, complete without her. Then she turned away. The hallway outside the dining room was dimmer, quieter, and she stood there for a moment, letting the sounds from inside fade into a muffled background. She placed her bag down gently against the wall and leaned beside it, resting her shoulder against the cool surface. Her breathing slowed as the noise receded, and she closed her eyes briefly before opening them again, her expression unchanged. The hallway light flickered slightly, then steadied, casting a soft shadow beside her on the wall. She looked down the hallway toward the front door, then back toward the dining room, weighing the distance without moving. Inside, the sound of chairs shifting grew louder, followed by a burst of laughter, and she turned her head away, focusing instead on the quiet space around her. She adjusted the position of her bag, standing it upright, and slid her hand into the pocket, touching the familiar objects inside without taking any of them out. The clock inside the dining room chimed softly, marking the hour, and she counted the chimes as they rang, one by one. When the last sound faded, she straightened away from the wall and picked up her bag again. She walked slowly down the hallway, her steps light, deliberate, and stopped near the window at the end, looking out at the darkening sky beyond. Outside, the streetlights were beginning to glow, casting pools of light on the pavement below, and she watched as a car passed through one of them, then disappeared. The dining room behind her remained full, the table still surrounded, the extra chair still missing. She stood by the window for a moment longer, then turned and walked toward the front door, her hand reaching for the handle without hesitation. The door opened quietly, and she stepped out, pulling it closed behind her with care, making sure it latched properly before letting go. The evening air was cooler, fresher, and she paused on the porch, adjusting her bag on her shoulder. From outside, the house looked unchanged, warm light glowing through the windows, the sound of voices faint but present. She took a step away from the door, then another, moving down the path without looking back. The door remained closed behind her, the table inside still full. As she continued walking, her pace steady, blending into the quiet of the evening.